Hey y'all.
All right. It's that time again, just like we promised. Same time as last week, 6
Yeah.
p.m. Central Standard Time. Facebook Live. Y'all know how we do it. I am your co-host, Deante,
And I'm Shekema
and we are the Dunlaps. We are them.
with the
And
Dunlaps.
yes, we is. All right, y'all. I hope y'all missed us. We missed y'all. We're
Mm-hmm.
gonna get it. We're gonna get back in it to win it like we always do it. All right, my love. We're gonna keep the tradition going. We're gonna start with you with our today in history and social injustice.
All right. So today is May 23rd. So today's day in history is from May 23rd, 1796. President George Washington offers reward for capture of Black woman fleeing enslavement. He offered a $10 reward for somebody who was absconded from the household of President of the United States. On Saturday afternoon, Onay Judge, a light mulatto girl, much freckled with very black eyes and fluffy black hair. She is of middle stature, but slender and delicately made, about 20 years of age. She has many changes of very good clothes of all sorts, but they are not sufficiently recollected to describe. And that was from the actual ad that he put in the American Daily Advertiser. Um,
I'm tripping off the black eyes. I guess that's before they knew eyes were brown and
yeah, but I don't think they really
fluffy hair.
cared. I mean, you
I'm
call us
just
black and we're not black.
touche. I mean, you know,
I don't know a lot of black people that's black. I know some people who say they're not black, that's black as I don't know what. But that's for another story,
that's for another day.
another episode. All right. So on May 23rd, 1796, a newspaper ad was placed seeking the return of Onay Judge, an enslaved Black woman who had absconded from the household of the President of the United States, George Washington. The audacity of putting his title in the. Okay. Miss Judge had successfully escaped enslavement 2 days earlier, fleeing Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and settling in freedom in New Hampshire. Known to the Washingtons as Onay, Miss Judge was given to Martha Washington by her father and had been enslaved as part of the Washington estate since she was 10 years old. As George Washington gained political clout, Miss Judge traveled with the family to states with varying laws regarding slavery, including lengthy residence in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's Gradual Abolition Act of 1780 declared that Black people enslaved by non residents of the state were legally freed after living in Pennsylvania for 6 continuous months. Sound like how they do financial aid, you know, like how you have to. Okay. To avoid enforcement of the law and prevent the men and women they enslaved from being legally freed, the Washingtons regularly sent Miss Judge and others in the household out of state for brief periods to restart the six month residency requirement. When her eldest granddaughter, Eliza Custis, married, Martha Washington promised to leave Miss Judge to the new couple as a gift in her will. Distressed that she would be doomed to enslavement after Martha Washington died, Miss Judge resolved to run in 1796. On the night of May 21st, while the Washingtons were packing to return to Mount Vernon, Miss Judge made her escape from Philadelphia on a ship destined for Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She had befriended many enslaved people in Philadelphia, and they helped her to send her belongings to New Hampshire before her escape. The Washingtons tried several times to apprehend Miss Judge, hiring headhunters and issuing runaway advertisements like the one submitted on May 23rd. In the ad, she is described as a light mulatto girl, much freckled, with very black eyes and bushy black hair. She is of middle stature, slender, and delicately formed, about 20 years of age. The Washingtons offered a $10 reward for Miss Judge's return to bondage, but she escaped capture, married, and had several children, and lived for more than 50 years as a free woman in New Hampshire. She died there still free on February 25th, 1848.
Hmm. Interesting. The last name is Judge, but you know, that's
Mm-hmm.
wow.
Yeah. And is it okay if I do one more, like after we finish talking about this one? Because tomorrow's is like worth talking about.
Yeah,
You okay with that?
yeah.
Just tell me like where your heart is, because it's heavy. This is a trigger warning. The next one is real heavy.
I mean, all of them trigger warning. I mean, we just literally talked about somebody who was,
You right.
captured for something that she was born with. She was,
Mm-hmm.
put back into bondage,
Mm-hmm.
for something that she was, an inalienable right, and that's freedom. It's by the was generally known to be the first president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And she was a
that's
mulatto. We ain't gonna try to act like we don't know how she got there. Wait.
and talk about the land of the free, home of the brave, and this dude like, yeah, you can't be free though. It's we got to get you back, and then the amount of effort that it took and the amount of money they were willing to pay, to keep somebody in bondage is reprehensible. It's ridiculous.
Honestly, for me, the idea of them having the machinations to start your 6-month period over. Like,
Yeah,
you almost free. Let me send you back somewhere else. Like,
got to start it over.
dang.
It was a game.
That's how I feel about these people who just bill your car without, like we're gonna continuously bill you until you tell us to stop. Like I feel like a lot of the systems we have in place, like I said, even with financial aid, like how long you have to live in a place in order to get a certain kind of tuition. Like if you're a part of this country, I feel like
And it's supposed to be federal student aid, right? Not,
yeah.
you know,
So that's the part that gets me. And it's like we have so many different things to keep people in bondage, right? Like interest on stuff. That compound interest is no joke.
like they said, that's one of the greatest weapons formed against man.
Every
Compound interest.
year you got to re-register your car so we can keep tabs on you and make you pay us for driving your vehicle. I pay to drive on the roads in Texas. I still don't understand that.
That's
Coming from
taxation.
somebody that like you pay the toll until you pay the road off, and then after that the toll booth closes. I don't understand that. I'm just gonna go ahead and be the first one. I don't understand that, but
That's where private ownership come in, and as long as somebody privately own it,
everything.
they get a cut. Every they want to cut every time you use it, so it's kind of
Everything.
like a royalty, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak.
It's my street.
So yeah, you got to pay to use it. It's interesting.
It's called a Texas highway, but my family owns it. That's just so interesting.
Yeah,
Okay, you ready for this next one? Maybe
I
not,
I,
but
I think so, but we'll go ahead. We'll rock with it.
all right.
That's how
So
we
this
do
one
it.
is for tomorrow in history, May 24th, 1911. Okay. So white mob in Oklahoma abducts and lynches Laura Nelson and her young son. The newspaper title says, "Woman and boy lynched. A mob enters the county jail last night and take two Negro prisoners whom they hanged from a bridge." On May 24th, 1911, shortly before midnight, a mob of dozens of armed white men broke into the Okfuskee County Jail in Okemah, Oklahoma, and abducted Laura Nelson and her young son, LD. The mob took the black woman and boy 6 miles away and hanged them from a bridge over the Canadian River close to the black part of town. According to some reports, members of the mob also raped Mrs. Nelson, who was about 28 years old, according to census records, before lynching her alongside her son. Their bodies were found the next morning. A few weeks before, the local police had reportedly come to the Nelsons' cabin and accused Mr. Nelson of stealing meat. When a white deputy sheriff was shot and killed while searching the cabin, Mrs. Nelson and LD, who was reported as 14 to 16 years old in news reports, but was more likely just 12 years old according to census records, were accused of killing him. The entire Nelson family was arrested and jailed after the deputy shooting, and some reports indicate that a 2-year-old daughter listed as Carrie Nelson in the 1910 census was also with Mrs. Nelson in jail. The prosecution's presentation at the preliminary hearing raised doubts about whether the state had sufficient evidence for a conviction. Many Black people were lynched across the U.S. under accusations of murder or assault. During this era of racial terror, mere suggestions of Black on white violence could provoke mob violence and lynching. Though these communities had developed and functioning judicial systems, white defendants were more likely to face trial, while Black people were regularly suffered death at the hands of a violent mob without trial or any opportunity to present evidence of innocence or self-defense. In this case, after Laura and LD Nelson were lynched, it was revealed that they claimed to have shot the deputy as he reached for his gun and seemed about to shoot Mr. Nelson unprovoked. Before any trial could take place, however, newspaper accounts sensationalized the case, misreporting the mother's and son's ages and presuming their guilt. Press reports described Laura Nelson as a very small of stature, very black, about 35 years old, and vicious, while LD was described as slender and tall, yellow, and ignorant, and raged. By the night of the lynching, Mrs. Nelson's husband and LD's father, whose name was reported as Oscar or Austin in surviving records, had already been convicted of a lesser offense, sentenced to a prison term, and sent to the penitentiary. He was not present to defend his family against the mob. Unconfirmed reports vary regarding the fate of the Nelsons' young daughter. Some claim she was found drowned in the river, while others claim she was found alive and taken in to be raised by a local black family. After a black boy reportedly found Laura Nelson's and LD Nelson's hanging corpses at the bridge the next morning, hundreds of white people from Okemah came to view the bodies. Some even posed on the bridge to have their photos taken with the bodies of the dead black woman and boy. Those photographs were later reprinted as postcards and sold at novelty stores. The mob's choice to deprive the Nelsons of their basic rights to due process and hang them on a bridge frequented by black people and near where many local black residents lived was meant to maintain white supremacy by sending a message of terror and intimidation to the entire black community. While the general sentiment is adverse to the method, the Okemah Ledger wrote a day after the lynchings, it is generally thought that the Negroes got what would have been due them. Even proceedings supposedly held to investigate the Nelsons' deaths were steeped in racism. When a special grand jury was called to investigate the lynching, the district judge instructed the white jurors to be mindful of their duties as members of a superior race and greater intelligence to protect this weaker race. No one was indicted, prosecuted, or held legally accountable for lynching Laura and LD Nelson. Mrs. Nelson and her son were two of at least 75 documented victims of racial terror lynching that took place in Oklahoma between 1877 and 1950. They are among more than 6,500 victims of racial terror lynching that EJI has documented between 1865 and 1950. So again, this is today and yesterday, or today and tomorrow, and racial injustice history as provided by Dr. Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative. For more, visit eji.org.
Was, these two examples or reports in history illustrate something that is, I don't even call it interesting. We talk about, it's interesting when people talk about, slavery it's not a new thing. It happened all over the world. What I think people fail to realize is what happened afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just slavery, it's slavery and what followed it, not to mention the fact that American chattel slavery was its own brand of slavery. But you think about the several decades of terror, following slavery. It wasn't enough to leave slavery alone, but there had to be, I use the word terror, this constant violence, this unnecessary violence. It's the one thing that never really gets highlighted, and it bothers me when people make this make the sentiment about how it's the past and it happened all over the world, and there were other different cultures around the world that were enslaved and this, that, and the third. But it's the follow-up violence that beyond bondage,
Mm-hmm.
that's the insult to injury. Not only are you quote unquote pulling yourself up from your bootstraps, but you can literally be framed, tried, and murdered Not even tried, really, because you're murdered for the most part. You know, your humanity is your humanity is denied, and you're completely denied your rights.
Yep.
And people make up anything as an excuse to hunt you down, to hunt a person down and kill them.
You can't say hunt them down like dogs because they don't hunt down dogs.
No, they don't. And it's just one of them things that just blows my mind at times, how that part doesn't get that part doesn't get acknowledged. It's like, okay, if we don't want to talk about slavery, well, let's just talk about Jim Crow. Let's talk about
Reconstruction, Jim
Reconstruction.
Crow,
Let's
Civil
talk
Rights
about that.
Movement. Like,
if we
some
want,
of those
okay,
people are still alive. Like the lady who had Emmett Till killed, she just died. So,
right,
like, even if you don't want to acknowledge the sins of your ancestors, like the people who bought people over here on boats, or people who took people out of here on boats, something has to be said about like how they passed that legacy down. That just, everybody just didn't become benevolent all of a sudden. You
right.
can look at social media and read comments. Anytime somebody has an opportunity to say something racist, they dive right in.
You know, and it's fascinating to me at how that part never gets talked about, really. And so it's good that we have this source of information to kind of point out these facts beyond just the slavery piece.
Yeah.
Right. About the historical violence that followed, the grotesqueness, the barbarism that followed
for a civilized nation.
Correct. That's the part that even if you say, okay, we don't even have to talk about slavery. Let's not talk about that. But let's talk about everything else. let's talk about even if you stop it at the 70s. Even if you go from Reconstruction to the 70s, let's talk about that was a bleak period of time if you were a Black person in this country. But again, that's why we need to remember these things. As much as we want to put it in the past, it's like you can't forget that stuff, because because to enslave somebody, you have to dehumanize them, and to dehumanize somebody, you got to be willing to do violence to them. And again, one kind of begets the other.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Whew. All right. Well, history, if you don't know your history, you're doing to repeat it. And the violence of today is nothing new. It's just recreated, and now we got cameras to capture it.
That's it.
So,
and people still don't want to acknowledge it, even on camera. The same way they, painted those, they decided how they wanted to describe those people to justify killing them, right?
Right.
They do the same thing now.
Enraged.
Somebody gets murdered, and the first thing they do is pull up what they did in 3rd grade.
Enraged. Really? Yeah. You came into his home and you were about to murder his father. Yeah, you'd be quite enraged if someone invaded your space and threatened the lives of the people you love. You'd be enraged too.
But then they said the daddy was already gone, though. Like later in the text, it said the daddy he was already in jail. So what was he really there for? Probably to rape the mama.
Yeah. I misunderstood. I thought it mentioned something about him getting ready to pull a weapon, and that's why
he probably was about to pull a weapon. So like later on it came out that the dad had already been locked up and he was already sent to the penitentiary.
That was the initial story. Okay, I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay. So their story doesn't even wow.
He probably was there to rape that lady. And he
And
might
then
have got ready to pistol whip her or put the gun in her head to let her rape him. And the little boy was like, nah, not my
yeah,
mama, you won't.
wow,
And they ended up still raping her anyway. That's what let you know what the intentions were. Like before they hanged her, they ended up raping her anyway.
despicable. Well, we like to paint this glorious history, but history is not a pretty thing. And like I said,
The
if you
present
don't
ain't
know
pretty
it,
either.
like I said, if you don't understand it, if you don't know it, it'll repeat itself.
Yep.
And if you
Yep.
because if you don't learn your lesson, you're gonna keep on learning it till you get it. And so it's important that these things is as uncomfortable and as as uncomfortable and as sad as they are to hear. It's sad to hear. It's the truth. It's just as valid as any other historical document or historical narrative out there. And whew, anything else on that?
No.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna switch gears. Um, wow. Well, that's history. And you either learn from it or it teaches you.
Mhm.
It comes back to get you. So, but anyway, but let's hop to it. Let's get into this day in technology history. Um, disclaimer: we are not sponsored nor supported by these websites in any way, shape, or form. We enjoy reading their content, believe the content is enriching and valuable, and so this is what we decide to share. So we are nowhere affiliated with either one of these websites. The information I'm about to present and have been presenting since we have been live is from thisdayintechhistory.com.
Okay.
So if you want to check my resources, check my facts, that's the source. All right. So I got two as well. These are both pretty relevant. So I'm going to start with the one for yesterday, and then I'll go into the one for today. So May 22nd, 1980. Happy birthday, Pac-Man. And I'm not talking about the boxer. I'm talking about Pac-Man. Well, you got to understand, Pac-Man means
First of
two
all, I
things.
heard it in my head. Like when you were doing the little thing, I'm like, I know exactly what sound it's making.
So Namco, shout out to Namco still going strong, still making some of the greatest video games ever. Namco's upcoming video game Puckman. So it was initially named Puckman, which makes sense.
Oh, because he's shaped like a puck.
Right.
I
So
like Pac-Man.
Namco's upcoming video game Puckman is location tested in a movie theater complex in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
After favorable initial testing, the game the game difficulty is slightly tweaked along with renaming the game to Pac-Man.
Okay.
Midway, Namco's US distributor thought that vandals would alter the letters P to an F. Makes sense.
Dang.
It says while the game was not officially released in Japan until July of that year, October 10th in the US, the creators of the game consider May 22nd to be Pac-Man's birthday because it was the first time the game was shown to the general public.
Okay.
One of the little known facts about Pac-Man is that it was specifically developed to be popular with women. Most video games of that time had war or sports themes to them, and women were not generally interested in those games.
I think it worked.
Pac-Man will be the first game popular with both men and women and was the first video game to become a social phenomenon. Pac-Man generated over $2.5 billion by the 1990s, becoming one of the highest grossing video games of all time. I'm sure many of you remember Pac-Man Fever, but Pac-Man was the first video game to break into the mainstream, forever changing our culture and society. Shout out to Pac-Man. Happy belated birthday,
Yeah.
homie. Happy
Wow.
happy belated.
Wow. So Pac-Man that shares a birthday with our oldest son. Turned
Absolutely.
26 yesterday. Happy birthday, Mario.
All right. So moving into today,
Okay.
the old world gets connected. So we go back a couple decades. May 23rd, 1903. Paris, France, Rome, Paris, France, and Rome, Italy are connected by telephone for the first time. Feel free to congratulate me for finding the picture for finding this picture at any time. So they had one of those. So in the cat in the on the site, it has one of those old phones where you pick it up on one ear
Wow.
and you
With
you
like the
speak.
can on.
Yeah. So that's one of the pictures they have for it. So May 23rd, 1903, Paris,
Wow.
France, and Rome, Italy are connected by telephone for the first time. History.
Wow. Yeah. We have a lot going on. And then since the last time we had a show, um, we missed Malcolm X's birthday
Mm-hmm.
on May 19th. So happy belated heavenly birthday.
Happy belated.
Mhm. Had a lot going on.
All right. So now we step forward into today.
Mhm.
All right. So what we talking about today, my love?
So, your wife be a little extra sometimes, but it's okay because you love me. And so what I
Yes, I
wanted to
do.
do was kind of talk about. So today's show is called Window Seat.
Window seats.
Can I get a window seat? I want nobody next to me. So yeah, so if you are familiar with Erica Badu, I believe this was the video where she was butt naked walking around, and she ended up getting
Oh,
a fine for the video.
oh, okay.
She
Oh,
was walking
okay.
around the city, I'm saying the hood, but bonking naked,
Wow.
and she was fine for that. But anyway, so yeah, so on an educator level, celebrated another Black woman. I'm an English teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
so I really wanted to honor Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. If you are an English teacher, NCTM member, she has been huge in our profession. And she created almost like a theoretical framework called Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors.
Okay.
Okay. And she was talking specifically about how it relates to children's books, right? And so how like my brain always connects so many things together. And so what she basically said was that, windows help us see into the reality of other people, not just imaginary worlds, but the mirror, that should help us like see into what other people are experiencing, right? To helping to
Right.
develop that empathy. And then mirrors mean that everybody should be able to see themselves reflected in the literature they are forced to read or that they
Okay.
enjoy to read, right? So, like, obviously, if you grew up like me, as a little Black girl, I didn't want to be an English teacher, but I've always loved to read and I've always been kind of like a fan of language. I rarely ever got to see anything that related to me. And that's because I only had like two Black teachers. I think I had three total Black teachers, and one of them was only for like a semester, but three Black teachers my entire K through 12 experience. So as you know, I didn't get a lot of stuff that was a mirror to me. I didn't have a problem, being a window and looking into the worlds of others. But the problem was that I also deserved that, right? And so it wasn't until I read like Their Eyes Are Watching God in 11th grade. Shout out to my Zora Neale Hurston. I did not see myself reflected in anything. That's a long time for a Black girl to go without, like, everything I read was like VC Andrews, Sweet Valley High, Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, all that kind of stuff. Judy Blume. I read everything Judy Blume. I read like Ramona and Beezus. I didn't see anything about characters like me, right? We read To Kill a Mockingbird and that Black man got killed. Like,
Mm,
just so
I
I
remember
didn't
that
have
one.
really anything to see myself, right? And then Sliding Glass Doors are, how we walk into a story and become a part of that world created by the author. So it gets you fully immersed into another person's experience. And so this is about prioritizing diversity, honoring other cultures, and promoting empathy. But then I thought about Erykah Badu's song Window Seat, and Erykah Badu was like, this is not working for me, right? I would need somebody to clap for me. I want to be in a place where I feel seen, where I feel heard. And so Erykah Badu's song is like the neo soul version of Dr. Brudine Sims Bishop, Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors. So last week we were talking about holding pattern.
Mm-hmm.
But this week, we know we're not. We know we've already identified that we're in a holding pattern. But we're going to talk about why are you in that holding pattern? What happens if you're trying your best to get out of that holding pattern? And a part of that holding pattern analysis is to realize you're in the wrong doggone place. So that's what we're talking about today. How do we
Sometimes it's
move
hard.
from holding pattern to a window seat? Because I need somebody to clap for me, right? What is that transition like? How do you know when something is wrong for you? How do you know when you're not surrounded by people you can trust? How do you know? And the first step of getting out of that holding pattern is to acknowledge that you're in one. But the next step, because before you can agree with God that something better is for you, you got to agree with God that the place you at is not for you. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So,
And I think part of that starts with recognizing, after you recognize that you're in a holding pattern, or you're a stranger in a strange land, and you're not where you're supposed to be, or you're not where you're welcome, is the recognition and understanding that you deserve to be.
That's it.
Somewhere where you're celebrated, somewhere where you acknowledged and recognized. I think that's the key thing, and I think that's when you're able to seek those opportunities, and you open yourself up to the possibilities, of an environment change, or group change, or change in your surroundings. I already said environment, but changing your setting, changing your surroundings, the people that you're dealing with, your job. Yeah.
Because I think most people who are even slightly empathetic are okay with windows, right? Being places where you celebrate other people,
Mm-hmm.
being places where you help encourage other people and you help lift other people up, and you just want to be a part of a winning team, right? Like everybody wants to be a part of a winning team. And when you go into a space, right, hopefully you're there because you're willing to, exchange through that sliding glass door. Like, I'm a little bit out, I'm a little bit in, but I'm willing to immerse myself in whatever this culture is, whatever this family is, whatever this team is. The problem is when you don't have the mirror,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't see anybody reflecting back to you what you authentically are, or what you authentically give, right? What you authentically desire to give. And I think that's the problem. And I think that's where the Erykah Badu song comes in, because it's like, this is not working. This is not working for me. And I want a window seat, and I don't want nobody next to me. I want to figure out who I am. I want to figure out where I need to be. And sometimes that requires a little bit of solitude, right? Isolation and solitude are not the same thing. Isolation is when nobody wants to be around you. Solitude is when, like, I want to be around myself, right? I'm
It's a
looking for a
choice.
ticket out of town, as Erykah
Mm-hmm.
said.
It's a choice.
Yeah, I'm choosing this because I need to get quiet. I need to get still. And the only thing I need to hear from is God and my intuition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not even your heart, because what does the Bible say? Your heart is deceptive. Who can trust it? Who can know it?
Right.
But your gut, though, that's something different.
Your intuition. When you are in an environment where I, where I could say you're casting your pennies into a bottomless well, and you're not getting anything back, I think you lose yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you find yourself, like Erykah Badu saying, I want a window seat. I don't want no, I want to be, by myself. You get to that point where you kind of given to you, you've given to the bone.
Yeah.
And you can't give anymore. You given to the point where you've lost yourself a little bit. And the thing about being supportive is when you the thing the when you're not when you give support and you don't get it back, that again, that's that casting your pennies into a bottomless well. And especially when you don't have any reserves to replenish you, when you're the support that don't get support, that's when that well starts to run dry, and you can lose yourself, you can forget about yourself, and that's when you find yourself in those places where you crave that solitude, where you're just like, I'm just done with the whole thing. I want to be somewhere with somebody where I'm celebrated, where I'm recognized for something, not just the other way around.
Yeah. And I think, one of the hardest things is that when you're a person who shows up as authentic, it never even occurs to you that other people don't. It takes, but when the Bible tells us to be as wise as serpent, but as harmless as doves, right? That's what that's about. Like, you have to know that you're not, we're being sent out into this world amongst wolves and sheep's clothing, right? And that's hard for us because, like, if your heart just isn't involved in stuff like that, you don't think that anybody else is capable of that. But that's not true. We have so much evidence that people are. I'll put it like this: the best thing I ever learned, and this was what helped me to understand that I should always keep my head on a swivel, right? When I learned that everybody is not necessarily against you, but everybody is always for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They want the same thing you want, right? And if it's a choice between you getting it and them getting it, they're going to choose themselves every single time.
And that's how I learned. That's the way I learned how to not take anything personal. Once I realized it's like, it's not, they didn't do that to me. They did that for them. They're not necessarily, now sometimes there, are people who do it to you.
Yeah, because they exist.
That does exist, but in most situations I found that it's just that person is just going for themselves. They're just trying to get theirs, however they get it, and you don't even necessarily factor into it. You're not
Until
even a
maybe later.
consideration. Right.
Yeah, it may be an afterthought, like after it's over, it's like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that to that person or whatever. But I think we've been talking about this for a few days now, and that's why we decided to, bring it to our audience. We've been talking about this idea that most of the decisions that people made that hurt us were not necessarily malicious, but they were born from that place of that person's own insecurities. Right? Like, you can actually go farther together than any of the group can go alone, right? You can go faster together than any of the individual members of the group can go alone. But when people are faced with that decision, like, oh, you know what? Maybe there's only one seat at the table, so I can't afford to try to bring this other person with me. I've got to take my seat. Right. And then that's that insecurity that, like, if I don't do it right now, it won't come. But the thing is that if you're a part of a team, like, the Bible talks about unity, and the Bible talks about dwelling together, right? And how God is there. Like, if any two or more of us gather together in his name, like, nothing can be withheld from us. And so when it's in the book of Ecclesiastes about two having, a multiplied return on their labor. And it's like, you may have to wait a little longer to see it, but if you stay focused and you're continuously lifting up God and doing what God has called the team to do, and you are on one accord, it will always be better, and there's no sorrow added to it, right? The blessings of the Lord make it rich and add no sorrow. There's no remorse involved in doing it the right way. But I think a lot about Joseph, right? And I think a lot about how when Joseph had to interpret those dreams, he asked them, okay, when you get out of here, don't forget me. And the first thing they did was forget him. And they hurt him, right? But he never stopped being who God made him be, because that's God gave him that,
Right.
right? And so it's like you could have Joseph ended up being elevated to like the second in command in that kingdom. Those people could have gotten elevated right along with Joseph had they stayed connected to him. But they looked at it as in this is Joseph's only time he's going to do this. They looked at it like a finite resource as opposed to an anointing that God gives. Joseph could have did that forever. He had been doing it his whole life.
Right.
The I didn't even come from him. It came from God. And so when you're operating in those types of spaces, you have to spend time in prayer to be aware, like, is this person's gift? Because if so, they got tons of that where this came from.
Yep. And it's and when you find yourself in those moments where, kind of digressing back to the point we were talking about not being in your right environment, and a lot of times it takes some recognition, and sometimes we lie to ourselves. I know, speaking for myself, I'm one of those people who I rarely give up on hope. I'm always faithful, right? And the idea that something can get better. I'm always of the mindset things can get better, but sometimes that's not always true, because it can't just be you who wants it to get better. It has to be a collective. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor, right? You can't go to the doctor and you want to stay sick, but the doctor want to get you well. It don't work like that. It has, if you go to the doctor and the doctor tell you what to do, but you go home and and you decide that you're going to ignore all the doctor's advice, and you wonder why you stay sick.
Yep.
And so it's in those moments where when you realize that you're at a turning point, you're at a crossroads potentially. You could stay with this notion, with the hopes that things could get better, or you could bet on yourself and venture into the unknown. And a lot of times it's a saying that said pain is an indication that something is wrong.
That's it.
And when you're in constant pain, whether it's psychological, physical, emotional, sometimes you have to do the courageous thing and assess your situation. And sometimes that's easier said than done. Because we have comfort. One of the basis of human nature is to seek comfort. And when we're comfortable in a place, we'll stay in something that is incredibly detrimental to us for the sake of comfort. It's what you know. It's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, right? And so wisdom teaches you to treat the pain. It's to acknowledge it, see what's wrong, do something about it. It's in immaturity where we sometimes find ourselves trying to push through and fight through and no, I'm gonna beat this. But you get to a point where you're like, okay, I've been through this enough. And when you leverage your wisdom, you shorten your learning curve.
That's good.
That's the benefit of learning from your elders and listening to people who know more than you. And I've been one of those knuckleheads who've had people tell me, if I was you, this is what I would do. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do it, because again, it was a source of comfort. It was what I knew. Not knowing that wisdom was shortening my learning curve. And if I had to listen to a lot more people who were giving me advice, my road would have been a lot shorter. The learning curve wouldn't have been so steep. And sometimes that's a really challenging thing to do. It's, again, youth, the feeling of having time, the feeling of invincibility, because sometimes that's what youth tells you, is that I got time. and I'm invincible. I'll get through it. And it's like, well, you don't necessarily have to. And so, saying that to say, when you recognize those moments where you're in a situation where you're not being appreciated, you're not being acknowledged, you're not being respected. Sometimes you have to say, okay, it's time to make a change. And sometimes that's weighing your options. What's worth it to you? Is it your respect, your dignity, or comfort? Again, comfort is the enemy. Comfort is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
It's a very dangerous thing. And it can put us in position to put up with loads of things that you don't necessarily deserve or have to even put up with if you're just willing to make that pivot. One of my biggest motivations nowadays is to understand change at a fundamental level, and
Good,
to
baby.
and to learn to truly embrace it. Because I my understanding is you can only truly embrace what you understand on some level.
Yep.
And when you understand the nature of change, the effects of change, you can more readily anticipate it and be prepared for it. Because when you understand that change is a constant, you prepare for it. And again, that's one of those things that is hard that's one of the things that that's hard to learn in your youth, because you just want everything to be the same, because it's either fun, it's either comfortable, it's either stimulating, or it's just that stimulus. It's feeding a need. And when needs get satisfied, you tend to go to where you get your needs satisfied. One way, and that could be either good or bad. It's just, and as long as that itch gets scratched, you're gonna go to where you get what you need. And so, so it's important to recognize those moments, to recognize when you're in a moment of pivot. You're at a crossroads where you either have to confront your comfort or grow, and you have to decide which one is more important. And sometimes that scale, that comfort is, listen, that comfort is something else.
Where
And
dreams go to die.
listen, it is, but it is so easy to underestimate, because it's insidious.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get an announcement from comfort one day and say, I'm on my way. Comfort just kind of creep in.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you 8 years, 9 years deep into something. You're like, what happened?
Yeah. And I think what you kind of hinted on is, when you talked about comfort, there's also that element of pride, your ego,
Oh, woo.
right? Like your ego tells you they're
Edging
not
God out.
possibly getting over on me. This is happening because this is, like, I'm on top of my game. So like nobody's getting over on me. There's all kinds of things that your ego tells you. And I just want to be clear, that we're talking about any kind of relationship. Not it could happen to parents, it could happen to children, it could happen in the workplace, it could happen in your church, it could happen anywhere. And so we're not talking about a specific place. We're talking about a state of mind, a state of being, right? And so with that said, I want to kind of close us out with some tips on how to know when wherever you are, that space you're in is no longer a good fit for you. And it's definitely challenging, but let's look at some signs, right? Because that's important. You got to know what are some signs. And if you feel these signs, don't get mad at us, right? Like Dee was saying earlier, pain is a sign that change needs to happen. It doesn't have to be some kind of overwhelming change, but life is all about letting go of getting dragged.
Yep.
So you can either make the change on your own or let the change be made for you. And only one of those is going to be only somewhat slightly in your control. So the first thing is, do you still have passion or interest Do you still have enthusiasm for the work, for the relationship, for the opportunity? And does that thing align with your personal interests or values? And if it did in the past, but it doesn't now, that's a sign that it's not right for you anymore. Time to make that shift. The next thing is feeling stuck. We talked about holding patterns last week. Feeling stuck or unfulfilled. If it doesn't challenge you, and if it doesn't provide you with a sense of fulfillment, or you feel stagnant or trapped in your current situation, that's an indication that it's time to explore other things. And exploring those other things might scare you. It might scare the living daylights out of you, but it's also an opportunity for you to prepare yourself for whatever that next is, right? Because whatever you're preparing yourself for is you're whatever you seek is seeking you. And so if you're preparing yourself for those other opportunities, they will come to you. But if you just stay stuck, it doesn't matter how gifted and talented you are, you're going to stay stuck right there and nothing good will ever come to you.
Spin your wheels.
The next thing is what your long-term goals is. Is this thing aligned with your long-term goals? Like, who do you want to be? And if you're just on that job because it pays your bills, but it's not aligning with who you aspire to be or what kind of legacy you want to leave, be up out. Be up out.
Absolutely.
You might have outgrown it. Maybe the profession that you started in is not even going to be there in a few years, and God is trying to tell you, figure out something else.
Right. Read the writing.
Because that happens. You know what I'm saying? If it's a toxic, negative work environment, if you don't feel supported, if it conflicts with your personal values, it's going to have that significant impact on your well-being and your professional growth. So pay attention to the signs of constant stress, lack of collaboration, or unhealthy dynamics. Okay. We're halfway through. 5, loss of motivation and engagement. If you consistently feel disengaged, uninterested, or find it challenging to stay motivated or committed to the opportunity, it may indicate that it's no longer the right fit for you. So if you're struggling to get up and go to that place every Monday, don't just beat yourself up about it. What is your spirit trying to tell you? If you are teaching and you no longer love those kids like you used to, don't just stay there because that's the only thing you know how to do. Because the only way teaching works is if you love the kids. The profession is so hard. It's so hard and listen.
Thankless.
The only way you can stay in that job and do well is if you love those babies. And so if you've gotten to the place where the babies get on your nerves too, it's time for you to go. 6 is the lack of growth or learning opportunities. If that thing don't stretch you, it ain't from God.
If it don't challenge you, it won't change you.
If it's not giving you opportunities for personal or professional growth, or if there's no skill development opportunities or advancement or learning experiences, it's hindering your progress. So being able to do it with your eyes closed and in your sleep, that's limiting your potential.
Right.
It's comfortable, but it ain't nothing good is gonna come of that. Trust your gut. That's number 7. Intuition and gut feeling. Sometimes your intuition can provide you valuable insights. If you have a persistent gut feeling that something is off or that the opportunity no longer serves you, you got to trust your instincts and explore those feelings further. You have to, right? 8, what's the impact on your overall well-being? If you crash every Friday night and spend your whole weekend in the bed getting drunk or whatever the case may be, that job is costing you too much. I don't care how much it's paying you. If it is constantly causing you excessive stress, burnout, decline of your overall well-being, you got to prioritize your health and consider other opportunities that are worthy of whatever toll they take. You know, and sometimes we just say, well, if they pay me more, I wouldn't care. If it was stressing you out like that, you ain't going to be allowed to see the money. So it don't matter.
Right.
Number 9, it's incompatible with the values or your culture. If you got to go in there and ignore every ounce of your Black self, if you got to go in there and ignore every ounce of your woman self in order to just fit in, don't do that. It's just not going to be for you, right? Because ultimately what it's going to do is create ongoing conflicts and dissatisfaction, right? And then they'll be calling you toxic instead of calling the workplace toxic. And then next thing you know, you're up out of there.
Yep.
Do yourself a favor and find a place where you fit well. And last but not least, if it does not have any future prospects or opportunities for you to advance, develop, or a clear path for growth inside that little space, that ain't for you, Chief.
Yep. You know, I want to, share, one of the greatest times in my life for growth is when I kind of abandoned my comfort. And that was when I left home. All I had was my truck, a couple of suitcases, and all my clothes and my PlayStation. That was it.
Not the PlayStation.
And
but I understand. I see that.
I took a chance because I essentially betted on myself. I was in a situation in my current role where I was having constant run-ins with my current leader, who was, constantly questioning my judgment, questioning my productivity, questioning my value, and really making my day-to-day difficult, and was at times challenging me, not just on a professional level, but as a man, and really overstepping boundaries and being and really wanting to get me out of character.
Yep.
And one thing that I've always been to a fault was patient. And I've never really, and sometimes, one of my faults is waiting for the perfect shot. So I never let him cross that line like that. And I took an opportunity to travel. And there was little to no safety net. Again, like I said, it was just me, my truck, and my, and the clothes I had, and the PlayStation.
And your PlayStation. That's your homeboy.
That PlayStation kept me company on so many lonely occasions. But anyway, I was on the road driving from city to city for hours. I was staying in location for a few months, do my job, drive to the next city, stay for several months, drive to the next city, and I would be in the car. I would be in my truck for hours. And being young, I had no idea what I was venturing into. I didn't know, I had no idea that some of the areas that I had ventured into was as dangerous as they were. And, sometimes ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
But I knew, one thing I knew, I knew I could fight. I knew I could scrap.
You were always trying to fight somebody.
Anybody, you're like, okay, at the very least, I knew, I could handle myself with my hands. I knew that part. I was like, all right, I'm a trained, I'm trained to do this. So you bark up this tree, it's gonna be some problems for you. At the very least, you're gonna have to be a bunch of y'all at the very least, right? And so, but that the being willing to expand into the unknown and go places where I had no foundation, didn't know anybody, so I had to recreate my support system every time I went, because again, I was only there for like a month at the most. I think the longest I stayed in the city was about 6 months.
Okay.
But and sometimes it was as little as 3 or 4 weeks. And to build a support system, and luckily I had kickboxing, Muay Thai, and that was an easy way for me to find a community, because I could just go to a gym and and I could connect with the people at the gym, and you don't know somebody until you punch them until they punch you in the face. And so I made a lot of really good friends just through that, and that was really all I needed. And I say all that to say that when you find yourself at that crossroads and you keep bumping up against this, you got an immovable object bumping up, that's running it. You have an unstoppable force bumping up against an immovable object. And when you find yourself in that role, in that position, which I was, you have to either pivot and
Yeah.
move and be that unstoppable force in a different direction, or you got to stick with your comfort and spin your wheels and waste your energy. And one of the greatest things I ever did was step outside of my comfort. And once I decided to let go of comfort and get out into the world and see what I could do, I grew and flourished in so many ways. I grew as not just as a professional, but as a person.
Yeah.
Learning how to communicate and connect with different people, and learning that the world was so much bigger than what I knew, and to be able to learn how to adjust to any situation, any climate, any environment. Because everywhere I went, I was in a totally different city, not just, a different part of town, sometimes different cities, sometimes different states, and learning to be flexible enough and open enough to explore the unknown and allow and trust myself enough to allow myself to expand into the situation and know that in any situation I can handle myself, and being able to embrace change. But it all starts with trusting yourself.
Yeah.
And trusting that you can adjust. Because if you trust the situation or your comfort more than you trust yourself, you're a slave to that situation.
That's good, babe.
And it is until you realize that the situation has a hold of you, you're going to be locked into that until you recognize that a lot of things in life is an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have a hold of you. But it wasn't until I realized that, at that moment when I had to make that change, I loved my job so much. I loved what I was doing, and, the environment I was in, not just at work, but the situation I had at home, all my little comforts.
Mm-hmm.
Is the good and the bad. I realized that I wasn't growing. I realized that I was spinning my wheels, and then I had to take a personal inventory. And when I found myself, facing myself, feeling like I want to fight my boss, and I want to,
Not fight them.
and I want to do, all of the, just these these unrealistic, these unhealthy things, these very destructive things. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
Self-destruction, self-sabotage.
Yeah, because that's self-sabotage, because you would have went to jail.
Yeah, it was self-sabotage. And again, never being one to be impulsive. I was glad that I made the decision I made. And it was interesting, ironically enough, the same boss that I was having run-ins with was like, yeah, man, go ahead and do it. Even if you take a pay cut, go ahead and do it. And I was
So
like,
he was sick of you too.
I was like, no, we was already sick of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say, and lo and behold, the job I had applied for, the hiring team leader reached out to me day after, told me what my starting pay was, which was like $4 or $5 more than I was currently making. And then I was like, can we bump it up another $1? He was like, of course.
Yeah.
I was like,
come on in, Deante.
I went to work the next day. I looked him in his face. I said, here's my 2 weeks. I'm gone. I'll document everything you need to know upon my departure, you have everything you need. And so and here we are today. And I was and I was glad that I was patient. I was glad that I understood, I had taken, I had been in my, I had studied martial arts long enough to know how to breathe in times of pressure. and how to control myself in times of chaos. Because when somebody else is out of control, it's easy to lose control. And when you have another an adult who, compared to me at the time, I was considered a kid at the time
Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
person, and this person was completely irate, unreasonable, and just really condescending. And I had learned how to stay calm and just be like, don't react, don't try to talk over him, don't even argue with him. Just let him have his words, let him say what he needs to say, respond to him, go back and do your job. And through patience, diligence, I found my opportunity. And once I was willing to make that change was when the opportunity showed itself.
Yeah.
But as long as I was like, I ain't going nowhere, I'm gonna bump up against this until I win. I was going home. It was nothing that could soothe my pain, you know. But it wasn't until I was like, you know what, I'm willing.
Yeah.
And the opportunity showed itself, and the rest is history.
And I think you hit on something like supremely important because, babies come out head first. And if they don't, something's wrong. Right.
Right.
And so like you have to decide in your mind, you have to agree with God in your heart that I'm ready to move.
Mm-hmm.
There is no need for God to present you with other opportunities if you just gonna stay stuck. Once you change your mind, then everything else will align with it. Like there's no need for you to be crying and lamenting about staying stuck somewhere. And then when the opportunity presents itself, you're gonna come up with all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. God's just waiting on you to agree that something better is out there.
And speaking about changing your mind, one of the key elements that you touched on was that I had changed my mind in terms of how I saw that person.
Mm-hmm.
I decided that, you know what, you're not my enemy. I was reading a book that the book said to me, you can't dislike something in another person that you don't want, first of all, disliking yourself. And when I read that expanded my mind. And once I started at least trying to see myself in him, and I could see my arrogance, I could see my lack of humility, I could see, parts of myself. I was like, you know what? This person isn't my enemy. After he listened to it, and I started listening to what he was saying in terms of how I could use it to my benefit. And once I started doing, and when that moment came, when he was like, yeah, you should take it. Even if you take, sometimes you got to take a lateral move to go forward. When he said that to me, that's when I was like, okay, you know what? Even if they offer me the same pay, I'm going to take this job. And when I opened myself to that opportunity, and when I talked to that hiring team, and he mentioned my starting pay was, like I said, about $5 more than I was currently making. Yeah. I was like, and that right there, I was like, okay, I have cracked some of this matrix.
Well, let's do it again, because we both in transition. Like we're always in transition, because team Dunlap always learning, growing, trying to figure out what's next. We agree with God that there's more out there for us. So
absolutely,
I'm down with it. Where we going next, Big Daddy?
Hey, we making moves, we make a move. We're gonna touch and agree. Okay. We ain't gonna tell the world, though. Y'all just gonna have to wait and see. One thing I have learned is, and Bishop TDJ said, don't tell people what you're doing.
That's it.
Don't tell people what you're doing.
If you see me getting quiet, it's probably because A, you pissed me off, but B, I'm working on something.
I don't tell nobody nothing. And the closest people to tell you, yeah, D don't tell you nothing that he doing. He just disappearing. He's just disappearing. You talk to him a few years later. Hey man, where you been? Oh yeah, I made a move and blah blah blah. Like, dude, you ain't saying no. Why?
That's it.
Why? So you could tell me every reason not to do it.
So you can pray against me.
No, I don't need nothing changing my mind. And once I make my mind up, and again, anybody close to me will tell you, once D makes his mind up, once I make that one, I'll talk to people. That one, I'll tell people nothing I'm doing. Because once I make my mind up, I don't want nobody. Because I think too much, and I take everything into consideration. So when I make my mind up, it's like nope, because I know me. And once I get something, once my logic kick in, like that person's saying, like nope, nope, I know me too well. This is my decision, and I'm making it. I appreciate the thought, but It ain't necessary.
Well, this has been so good. We're a little overtime, but it's only because we're so
Hey,
passionate about growth and
ain't nothing
getting
wrong
the
with overtime.
absolute best of what God has for us. But
Overtime where you make the money.
I love you, sir.
Overtime is where champions are made. Let's get it. With that being said, those of you all who have hung with us up until now, we appreciate y'all. Y'all are true champions.
We do.
Y'all are true champions. The champions are made in the later rounds, and so we took this one kind of deep, out into the later rounds, and we appreciate your attention. And with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and wrap this thing up, put a bow on it, stick a fork in it, call it done. This has been another episode of In It Together with Dunlaps. I am your co-host, Deante.
And I'm Shekema.
And we are the Dunlaps.
We're the Dunlaps.
You can catch us again next week, next Tuesday, same black time, same black channel, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live. Join us. And if you can't join us, you can catch us on Spotify, YouTube, and whatever other podcasting platform that you choose, whatever you choose. We there.
No, I'm talking about.
No, I'm talking about. Find us, look us up. In It with the Dunlaps.
Bye, y'all.